Sound, speed, camera, rolling. All right, Tim. Action.
Hello, my name's Tim Malone, and I'm a retired American history teacher. I taught American history at Elgin Community College in Elgin, Illinois for 25 years, and I've decided to tape some of my lectures. And today, I want to talk about regionalism. I want to talk about regionalism in the United States of America. How important is the concept of regionalism in American history? Let me start by saying that officially, the official discourse in this country, I think, is to downplay regional differences, is to downplay American regionalism. E pluribus unum, our motto, out of many, one. And indeed, because of the history of the founding of what would become the United States of America, the 13 British colonies on what we now call the Eastern Seaboard, because of that legacy, we have a federal system where states are very important. States wield very important powers in our system. Federalism. But the accent, the emphasis is always on the United States. E pluribus unum, one. And indeed, our economy is run as one. States aren't allowed to have their own money, for example. But nevertheless, we have a federal system, and federal systems are prone to falling into pieces. And of course, that happened in our history. I say again, how important is regionalism in the history of the United States? And you immediately think Civil War, Southern secession, one of the great events in American history, the Civil War, and then Reconstruction after the war, the effort to reunify a broken, regionally, a broken nation. Now, my opinion is the reason I have a lecture on regionalism, and the reason I stressed it to my students is because I don't think the regional reality of the United States of America is stressed enough to the citizens of the country. Again, the narrative, and perhaps rightfully so, is all 50 states, one nation, one nationalism, one Big Mac everywhere. Americans, in my opinion, are not clued in to the importance of the regional nature of our country. I've grappled with this regional business for years, and I'm still somewhat confused because, of course, we have 50 states, and we usually group regions of the country by states. We'll come back to that. I mean, regionalism, does it matter where you live? Now, I'd ask my students that in class, and of course they'd say yes. They'd say that, in other words, the ideas in your head, the way you perceive the world I'm in Rockford, Illinois here, northern Illinois, here, as opposed to Denver, Colorado. Very different geographical regions. Does it matter? You're going to have different thoughts in your head depending on where you live? Most of my students would say, well, duh, obviously. But then it's like, no, we have the same political parties. We have the same chains and stores, and we have the same news by and large. No, it doesn't matter where you live in the United States. Yes, it does. Obviously, it does. So it's a conundrum. I grapple with the question, does it matter where you live in the United States in any meaningful sense? Does it matter where you live? Now this matter of regionalism, sort of the focusing in on the micro, is pertinent because globalization, now there's a term for you, globalization, seems to gain more currency with each passing day, or at least it did up until the last 4 or 5 years. It's a worldwide market. It's a truism, no? And yet the countervailing idea that it matters what region of the country you come from also continues to have cultural resonance. So what is it, global or regional? Well, you say, well, it's both. But can one or the other gain ascendancy? 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it seemed that globalization was on the rise. And of course, the planet is the unit for humanity, isn't it? These lines that divide the, 200 and some nations, the nations, you can't see them from space. They don't exist. They're in your head, national boundaries, lines on a map. So again, globalism, well then, Brexit, England left the common market. The Republican Party in the United States under Donald Trump wants to put up walls, wants to become self-sufficient in economic matters. So there was a backlash to globalization nationally. But we're looking at the United States, right? The United States, regionalism. And my contention is that just below the surface of E pluribus unum, there's a strong strain of regionalism in the United States. And that strong strain of regionalism exists even though most Americans don't think about it. It's an unacknowledged reality that this country is divided into regions, and that reality has profoundly affected the history of the country and the current status of the country. Now, there's a current, this is April 10th, 2024, and there's a movie coming out called Civil War, because according to our pundits, and me too, we're a profoundly divided ideological nation right now. A lot of thinkers and pundits and professors claim that we're more divided now than any time since the first Civil War in 1861 to 1865. And that there's a Civil War coming, Civil War II is coming. Now, I don't know about that. But it's interesting that's in the air. The people who, and there are some people in this country who want a second Civil War, I don't think it's very many, but they want a second Civil War. And I don't know if anybody's thought the next step. I don't know. I haven't seen this movie, Civil War. I don't know how they frame it, what kind of war it would be. And I lecture on war. Maybe my next one I'll do will be my lecture on war. Generically, war. What's war? What kind of wars are there? I don't know what kind of war a second American Civil War would be. But as a historian, I start down that path. What if? And I think historians have to do what ifs. I know there's a lot of historians say, oh, no, no, no. But no, historians, if they have methods and models, sort of have to try to predict what's coming. Of course, with caveats that no one can see the future. So I think about a second American Civil War. What kind of war would it be? And whoa, right now, April 2024, there's a war in the Ukraine, right? And it's been going on for a year. and thousands of people are dead, and vast areas of eastern Ukraine are devastated. And yet I never hear anybody talk about what kind of war is that? What kind of war is it? Now, it seems to me that every war is a little bit different, at least a little bit different. So if we had a second American Civil War, what kind of war would it be? What would it look like? And I immediately go, it would go regional. It would be regional war. Just like the first Civil War was regional war. Now, of course, to a hardcore nationalist, and who isn't a nationalist, regionalism is a distraction at the least and a real danger to national unity at the worst. There's lots of nations who've had trouble with breakaway regions. It's one of the standard types of conflicts. It's one of the standard problems with nationalism, is that through historical accident sometimes, regions that are incompatible are forced into the same nation. And there's trouble. Breakaway regions is one of the major causes of conflict in a modern nationalistic world. Yet regionalism can't be ignored in the history of the United States. And then I have here, no kidding, right? Because we're still fighting the first Civil War 160 years later in many ways. Still fighting the American Civil War, the first one. And again, region versus nation, right? Nationalism, the idea that regional differences within a nation should be destroyed, should be de-emphasized, should be warred against by the central government. Around the world, there's examples of this. Around the world. Nationalism, regionalism. Again, let me repeat. I don't think most Americans understand the powerful current of regionalism that's just beneath the surface of our nationalism, American nationalism. We're considered to be one of the more nationalistic of advanced countries today. We're supposed to be a strong nationalistic country. And yet I'm telling you that if civil war were to break out in this country, a second civil war, it would go regional immediately. Regional. It would be regions against each other, just like the first Civil War. And when you think about it, you think about the country falling apart regionally, how should you think about that? What are the regions, right, that would be falling apart? Now, in the first Civil War, the North, and the North and the South, right? Let me go there. When you think about regionalism and the problem of regionalism in the history of the United States, where do you start? North versus South. The Civil War, the first great regional crisis, not the last one. And perhaps there's more regional crises coming, is my point. North versus South. Can you imagine? Here's a map of the North and the South in the Civil War. But you see, so it's bipolar, North versus South. But no, it's not bipolar. What's the leftover? What's the leftovers? What was it called? Well, because, this is North versus South is the big historical regional divide because of the war, because of our 160-year, still going on in some people's minds, the original Civil War. And that would play a role in the next Civil War if we have one, the first one. But there's a second main division in the United States: north, south, east, west. So when you think about the United States of America in the first Civil War, north versus south, with the west, the rest. And some people, so there's three parts, and north, south, west. And some people say what caused the Civil War? Politically, what caused the Civil War was the admission of California when the West went north. The West went north. And the South, slavery, their economic, cultural, legal system was doomed. Now maybe it was doomed and maybe it wasn't. The Southern leadership thought it was doomed, and so we're getting out. The leaders of the South, the slavocracy, the 8,000 rich plantation owners mostly, who ran the South, when the West went north, said, we got to get out of here. We're doomed. East versus West, North versus South. Is that where we are today? If we talk about regionalism in the history of the United States, if we're going to talk about regionalism today in 2024, what are the regions? North, South, West, is that adequate? Is that an adequate way to divide up the country today? I think not. I think we got to get into this a little bit more. How do you divide the country up regionally? What are the most logical and reasonable divisions? If we're going, let's assume that we're a regional country, and I'm assuming that. More regional than most Americans think. What are the regions today in 2024? We talked about 1861, north, south, west. What are the regions today? And I'm going to put up a series of maps here where various takes on regional subdividing the country. And I laugh because I tell my students, I said, hey, because I'm going to show a number that are different. Today, people divide the country up differently, regionally. And I would joke with my students, hey, get a map of the United States, go home, get a pencil. Anybody can do this, it's open season, but I'm looking for logical, reasonable subdivisions, historically reasonable subdivisions. Now, again, I'm going to show you a series of maps. I think they're going to click by pretty easily, but here's one that's got Northeast, Southeast, Midwest, Southwest, Rocky Mountains, and Pacific. 6. And they follow state lines. A state is either in one region or another. This map, and most of the maps I'm going to show you, that divide the country up regionally. And again, you can make an argument for or against any of these subdivisions. They follow state lines, by and large. Here's another one. Again, Northeast, Southeast, Southwest, Midwest, West, only 5 in this one. Now, this is kind of a parlor game, right? Let's divide the country up into regions. But I think it's more important than most Americans realize. Here's one, divides the Midwest into upper Midwest and lower Midwest. And the East Coast and Southeast, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This one's got 7 regional subdivisions. Again, following state lines. Oh, man. Here's one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 regions. And this one has a region called the Great Lakes region. There's no Midwest on this one. It's Northeast, Middle East, Southeast, Southwest, Pacific, Rocky Mountains, and North Central. Oh, and the Great Lakes region. Great Lakes region. I don't mean to get bogged down here, but I find this fascinating. How would you divide, in other words, if there was a second civil war started next week, my opinion is that the country would fall apart into regional blocks. And what would they be? Where do we start? And to me, I think you start in the Northeast. You start in New England. Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York. The Northeast. The most distinctive, the most readily identifiable region. No. You know, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, North Carolina, South Carolina, Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, the old Confederacy. The old Confederacy. Well, okay, so New England, the South. Let's call it the South again. So it would be a replay to a certain extent of the first Civil War if we had another one. The Northeast, and you got to understand the Great Lakes, right? Chicago is New York City west. Chicago and New York. So Chicago's with New England. In my opinion, historically, automatically, there's not going to be a New England country and a Chicago area country. They're historically together, always will be. So you got New England, the South, and then what are we going to call it? Most call it the Midwest. The Midwest. But as you can tell from these maps that I've shown you, definitions of the Midwest vary greatly. Is North Dakota in the Midwest? Is eastern Montana, which is very similar to North Dakota, topography-wise and climate-wise, are they in the Midwest? Again, regionalism and trying to define what is a region historically and resource-wise and geographically, geologically, agriculturally. I have maps for all of these coming up. But let me just say here, let me introduce evidence here. Here's a book, American Nations, a history of the 11 rival regional cultures of the North America by Colin Woodard. 11 rival cultural regions. Very interesting book. It's a very interesting book. And here's a map of Woodard's 11 nations. Well, let's see, I think. Why can't I see the damn thing? Here it is. He goes county by county, Woodard. Every county in the country. He doesn't follow state lines. He follows county lines. And you can see here, New England he calls Yankeedom. And it goes all the way to Minneapolis. the Great Lakes, northern Illinois. In fact, Winnebago County, where we are right now, is just one county away from what he calls the Midlands. And then there's 11 of them. And it's a very sophisticated way. He explains in the book how he comes to his conclusions about what culture dominates a county. They're contiguous, pretty much. But Yankeedom, from Boston to Minneapolis, the North, that's the North. Now, Woodard makes the claim that as the twig is bent, so grows the tree. In other words, Yankeedom, Boston, was settled by the Puritans in 1630. And the Puritans, we talked about Puritans earlier in one of these lectures I gave. Go check it out. Puritanism is very unique culturally. Very unique culturally. And in my opinion, Woodard's Yankeedom is the most powerful region, if you want to, it's a huge geographical area, is the most powerful region in the country. Boston, Hartford, New York, Philadelphia, all the way down. He doesn't go all the way down, but what they call the Acela corridor from Boston to Washington, D.C., there's a train, an Amtrak train runs from Boston to Washington, D.C. And I know he's got Washington, D.C. in the Tidewater area, but region. But that area, and again, Chicago and the Great Lakes region, that's the most powerful region in the country. That's the region that won the first Civil War. And what are the rivals today? Well, the South, particularly Texas, right? Boy, Texas has come into its own. Texas. Then, of course, the left coast, he calls it, Washington, Oregon, and California. Again, those areas, the gold rush, when they were settled, tipped the balance against the South. And California, Washington, and Oregon, at least the coastal areas, which is, the western areas of Washington and Oregon are pretty right-wing, are pretty conservative, but they're dwarfed by the coastal cities. So you got Yankeedom and the left coast. If they're allied, which they, according to Woodard, they will and always will be, I don't know. Now, apparently there's a document, America 2025, about what would happen if Donald Trump were reelected president this year in 2024. And it's a sketch, what do they want to do? And apparently in there's this idea that Trump would come as president, would nationalize the Texas National Guard, make them federal troops, and send them to Chicago and Cleveland and Washington, D.C., and New York City and Boston. Texas National Guard troops would be sent to Boston, New York City, right, Philadelphia, to round up undocumented workers. That's a plan that's been floated. And here, let me just go. Yeah, go ahead, try it. Oh, that's never going to happen. There's no way Texas militia are going to go and conquer New York City. It'll be the other way around if it's any way at all. It'll be New York City conquering Austin. Regionalism. Woodard's book is intriguing, and he describes himself as a journalist, a historian, a writer, a historian, and an award-winning journalist. And historian. I find a lot of what he says here pretty compelling. I don't know about the way he divides the map up. It looks pretty kind of chaotic. But again, he goes county by county. In Illinois, it's funny because Illinois is northern tier Yankeedom, then the Midlands cross the middle of the state, what he calls the Midlands, which is an interesting concept. And then Greater Appalachia is southern Illinois. Have you ever been to southern Illinois? Greater Appalachia. Right on. So I guess my point is that regionalism is alive and well in the United States of America. And we're on the brink always, that might be an exaggeration, I don't know if we're on the brink always, of falling apart. And if we fall apart, the Northeast and the Midwest, right, and California and the West Coast versus the rest, it would break down that way almost immediately. And I could see when the troubles start where conservatives in my neck of the woods right here in northern Illinois would be said, the authorities would say, get. And in Texas, in Mississippi, and Alabama, the authorities would say to liberals, get. And there'd be a massive sorting of the nation, which would accentuate the regionalism. And then it would be up to the Northeast and the Midwest and the West Coast to decide whether they wanted to once again force the South and Greater Appalachia back in the Union and parts of the far West. Now, in the first Civil War, those parts of the country decided, yes, we're going to raise armies and we're going to force the South back into the Union. I could foresee a situation where Yankeedom, Midwest, West Coast says, you let the people go that want out, and you can have your little racist republic. So let's see here. There's something else I want to show you here. The regionalization of the regions. Oh yeah, let's not forget the Midwest, our region. I mean, I asked my students, what region of the country do you live in? And this is northern Illinois, and it's almost unanimous, right? Midwest. We're in the Midwest. It seems to be a universal self-identification of people who live in the Midwest. But the Midwest, as we saw from the maps earlier, is defined very differently by different people. The Midwest. I kind of like this map, which regionalizes the Midwest. The North Woods, the Lower Lakes, the Heartland, the Midland Valley, that's the Ohio River. So most people think of the Midwest bounded by the Ohio River in the south. He calls that area the Midland Valley, and then the Plains. This guy has the Midwest going all the way out into central North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska. In other words, eastern North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Kansas are in the Midwest. And Buffalo is in the Midwest, according to this. See, anybody can do this. I just find this map here to be interesting to someone who identifies as a Midwestern, because there's subdivisions, according to this, of the Midwest, and this kind of makes sense to me, these subdivisions. And let's see, so where do I live? I live in the Lower Lakes region of the Midwest, which involves the northeastern, Chicago would be the capital of the Lower Lakes region. Oh man, see, Here's a map of the original 13 colonies, the founding. And according to Woodard, as the twig is bent, so grows the tree. The Puritans, with their unique views of government, education, religion, good government, 400 years later, according to Woodard, those characteristics are still what define Yankeedom, that area from Boston to Chicago, beyond. As the twig is bent, so grows the tree. And, it doesn't make a lot of sense. How can it... Cultural traits persist based upon the founding of the area, according to Woodard. Well, not just him. This is a theory that a lot of historians have. But here's a map of the physical regions of the United States. And to what degree do they correspond with the regions as we sketched them out earlier? Does it matter where you live geographically, physically? And according to this map, we live in the interior lowlands of North America. The interior lowlands of North America. And it's funny because they have Great Plains and the Pacific ranges and valleys for California, the basin and range area of Arizona and New Mexico, the coastal plains, the Gulf coastal plains, and then the East Coast coastal plains. They don't correspond very well, but then up here they have New England. New England. It's got its own special designation. It's not very descriptive. It's rocky. Here's one, the land regions of the United States. And this is in black and white. I don't know how it comes across. But again, Gulf coastal plains, Atlantic coastal plains, prairie and plains is where we live in northern Illinois, according to this, land regions of the United States. Great Plains, California, the Pacific region. Again, there's all different ways. Here's a good one, the agricultural regions of the United States. This map is somewhat dated, I think. In northern Illinois, we're right on the dividing line between what they call the spring wheat area, hay and pasture region, and the corn belt. Then they got the corn and winter wheat belt, and then they got the cotton belt, the belts. And I used to sort of half joke with my students about the Civil War, that it was the cotton belt versus the corn belt. And who won? Cotton can't stand up to corn. And here's another one, the interior central lowlands, the lake plains. Do these geographical and physical and agricultural regions have anything to do with our politics and our culture? See, I don't know. See, you can get lost in this pretty easily. Does it matter where you live? Does it matter that we're surrounded by millions of acres of corn here, where I live? And they're surrounded by millions of acres of cotton in Alabama and Mississippi and East Texas. I mean, does it matter? Again, you ask somebody, does it matter where you live? And they'll say, yes. And then you think about it and you say, no. We have national elections. We have national food chains. We have national advertising. We have national sporting events. No. Whether you look out your window and see vast, flat cornfields, or you look out your window and see the Rocky Mountains, doesn't matter to who you are. And in support of that argument, we're one of the most mobile nations in the world. People move region to region all the time in this country. And would you say to somebody who moved from Rockford, Illinois here, the Corn Belt, to Casper, Wyoming, 10 years later, did it change you? Did you become a different person? Did you think different thoughts? Did you vote for different candidates because of your move from one region to the next? Starkly different geographical, geological regions. Does it matter? Yes, obviously. No, obviously. It's a conundrum. Regionalism. And yet, I guarantee you that if Civil War II comes, it will take on a regional flavor immediately. So, yes, I don't know. But I find it a fascinating subject in American history, and one that is generally ignored. Regionalism is not taught, the history of regionalism, I guess I should say, is not taught adequately in our history classes, in my opinion. That's why I have a lecture on regionalism in United States history, regionalism. And I don't know if I helped explicate anything with this lecture, but it's worth thinking about. Again, I think for maybe obvious reasons, we're a vast country. National unity, right, requires a ignoring, a downplaying of regionalism. Yet it's there, just below the surface. A powerful regionalism in the United States. It's a very interesting topic.